The story begins by showing a sudden rupture in the ozone layer that protects the Earth. He was holding on, but there was no warmth left in his body. Their hands and feet went numb. Only darkness and bone-freezing death remained. Then the soldiers there froze instantly before their eyes. In the control room, a man stared at the screen, stunned. Before he understood, he became an ice statue. Soon the cold wave swept into the island. A dog sensed oddness, sprinting towards it. Then a young man came, looked up, not knowing what it was. Within moments, that 140-degree wave froze the entire family solid, all at once. A few days later, a ship with no one on board crashed into the shore, its engine still running. Government took notice. Fire brigade and ambulances were sent immediately. All 14 people aboard the ship were confirmed dead. Mark and his colleague got a call, rushed over. Inside the cells, lots of ice had formed. This meant they had all frozen to death from a sudden, deadly cold wave of something like 100 degrees. But how could the temperature drop so low in the middle of the sea? It was very strange. To solve this mystery, Mark and his partner immediately went to investigate the wrecked ship. There, they saw that the inside of the ship was completely wet, as if it had been flooded. The hard drive left by the crew was also soaked with water. They had no choice but to take the hard drive to the lab to fix it. They immediately returned to the weather center and dried the hard drive with the help of a fan. Mark connected it to a computer. On viewing the video, he saw the weather suddenly worsened. Although a lot of the data was corrupted, a hollow section, 2 stories high, appeared on the screen. Mark noticed it at once, kept investigating. Meanwhile, the middle layer appears there. Sunlight suddenly harmed this layer, making the temperature there plunge very sharply at once. Normally, the ozone layer acts like a shield and helps to block the cold air from space. But due to pollution from the sea, the air pressure in the ozone layer increased. As we know, cold air always flows towards areas of higher temperature. Therefore, the deadly cold air formed in that middle layer tore straight through the ozone layer and rushed towards the Pacific Ocean. So the research vessel was attacked at a very bad time. The director of the weather department frowned upon hearing all this. He asked Mark how cold the air actually was. Mark told him seriously that it was 160 pdg. By the time it reaches sea level, it can drop to 40 tg. But for humans, that's enough to freeze anyone in an instant. Mark said that this disaster would soon descend upon the sea. He hoped the director would inform everyone in time so the danger could be averted. But the director saw it as Mark's hunch, with no hard proof at all, and wouldn't stir public panic without solid evidence either. The director advised Mark to keep an eye on the cold air and said that he would ask other teams to investigate it as well. In the end, Mark had to go to a friend who worked in the warning department. He hoped his friend would issue a cold wave warning and prepare people in advance. But his friend said he didn't want to lose his secure government job. He also felt that Mark's theory was based only on book knowledge and that he had no solid proof. He told Mark to bring some solid proof before coming to him. But Mark had studied the weather his entire life. He knew very well how quickly a cold wave could strike. He had no time to look for evidence. The director got the notice too. The cold wave's true face was exposed. The director decided to call an emergency meeting and take drastic measures to deal with this icy wind. The secretary suggested that Mark should also be included in the meeting, but the director was afraid he would be embarrassed in front of Mark, so he refused. He thought the meteorologists he'd called were far better than Mark. Then TV flashed an emergency alert. The cold wave was spreading fast right now. On TV, everyone was told to stay alert. Revelers outside ran home in terror. People boarded up the windows of their houses with wooden planks and hid inside instead of going out. School pupils also left immediately, everyone rushing to get home to their parents. The wave was so powerful that it froze a 100-meter-high building solid in an instant. An aircraft full of passengers was about to land when it suddenly got caught in the cold air. Sadly, it was late. The plane froze, then stopped dead. The aircraft's hull shook hard. The next second it slammed into the ground, exploding loudly. The cold air strike came far faster than anyone expected at all. The people who had just left the supermarket after shopping didn't even get a chance to reach home. The deadly cold wave was approaching from behind the building. People began to bang on the glass doors of the roadside shops to save their lives, but the landlady was too scared to open the door. She could only watch helplessly as everyone outside froze to death. Finally, the landlady played the music. A layer of ice formed on the scattered clothes. But the cold wave was absolutely ruthless. It burst straight through the door and entered. This meant that staying inside wasn't 100% safe either. But the risk of freezing to death outside was more than 100%. The landlady also met a cruel death in the middle of that song. The mother with the hat was very unlucky. There was an underground room in the house. She needed to drive off with her child. She'd only just loaded the car when, in a heartbeat, a cold surge swept towards them from nowhere. At once, no need to dwell on the outcome. Mother and son froze at once. Mark still ran with his daughter. The cold wave coming from behind was so close that it was just about to hit them. Fortunately, they finally made it back to the weather station. She came down the road, her whole body stiff with cold. They were helpless before the utter horror. Soon, she stopped breathing. Meanwhile, Mark was monitoring the damaged ozone layer via computer. A massive cold wave was still descending from there. If the hole stayed open, Earth would slip into an ice age in days. Soon Mark planned to release 300 remedy-filled balloons to seal it from above. Once the balloons reach a height, a fighter jet will fire a chemical missile to burst them. The blast would release intense heat, but he objected at once. Mark believed that instead of going against nature, the only way was to eliminate the problem at its root. The director's plan could only stop the cold air for a short time, but it was impossible to eliminate it completely. Mark was afraid that if the accumulated cold wave burst again, it would be even more deadly. The director didn't even think it was necessary to talk to Mark about these doubts. He thought he was the country's best scientist, and that his method could never be wrong. Mark was now as helpless as a bear that had swallowed a hedgehog, and could do nothing. He just told his assistant to keep an eye on the cold air. The director immediately contacted the army and started working on his plan. He wanted to divert the path of the cold wave by exploding balloons, but unfortunately, the plan failed because the air suddenly became even more powerful and collided with another air wave. Over the Pacific Ocean, the wave suddenly changed direction and began to spread across the entire world. A new wave of trouble had arrived. That terrible minus 140-degree cold air engulfed the whole world in an instant. Its first impact was on the city of Tokyo, as it was late at night there. The people of Tokyo didn't understand what was happening, and they all died in their deep sleep. After that, the cold air moved rapidly towards the city of London in England. It covered the whole city in ice. London's famed buildings were wrecked. Russia's Moscow wasn't spared either, at all. The Kremlin there turned into a pile of white snow in an instant, and the entire city became a frozen town. But the huge ship ahead was also helpless and trapped in grave danger. In just a few minutes, the huge ship turned into a large block of ice. The senior officer's assistant already had a feeling that this mission would fail. She secretly sent the information about the chemical components in those balloons to the meteorologist, Mark. Everyone was nervous, staring intently at the changes on the screen to see if the cold wave could be stopped. Even the senior officers were starting to panic. According to the plan, as soon as all the balloons reached the designated altitude, the fighter jets also got ready to attack. They quickly reached the center of the cold wave and pressed the launch button. Missiles were fired into the freezing wind. Then the chemicals inside the balloons began to take effect right away. The missiles tore through the sky, leaving white tail-like trails. Everyone was extremely tense and just watching the screen. If the mission failed, everything was finished. Seconds later came a huge blast, and chemicals from 300 balloons dispersed fully into the air. But things didn't go as expected. Although the explosion was successful, it only cleared the fog that had settled over the cold wave. The cold wave's central belt remained completely unaffected. Instead, temperatures plunged a further 40 degrees down there. For 400 years, lethal cold wave raged on, with temperatures plunging below minus 180 degrees. Finally, the administration had to admit defeat and confess their failure to the public. They stated clearly that there was nothing more they could do, and people would have to rely on their fate. This fear of death had completely chilled the world's atmosphere, and every famous building in the world was wrapped in a blanket of ice. Even disaster-tested Jumian Bridge couldn't withstand nature's assault this time either. Mark felt as if death was hovering thousands of meters high in the sky. In the next 24 hours, the entire world was about to be plunged into an ice age. Seeing this great crisis, the administration finally had to swallow their pride and asked Mark about his plan. Mark did not hold a grudge about the past. He explained without hesitation that his plan was to send a rocket filled with highly explosive fuels into the hole in the ozone layer. To watch more amazing videos like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Mm. Mm.